Welcome to Go Solo Live.
Don't you mean go solo live? Have you ever been asked why on earth would you travel alone? Go Solo Live not only answers that question, but celebrates life as a midlife solo traveler. This is a safe place for women to come together to reminisce about their travels, encourage others to travel, and to dig into the real lessons learned from these journeys. Now join Jennifer Buchholz with Transform Via Travel as she and her guests share stories of the solo travelers of midlife women.
Hello, sisters, and welcome to Go Solo Live. This is Jennifer Buchholz with Transform Via Travel. It's time to sit back, grab a cup of coffee, and enjoy my conversation with Helen Suk as we talk about travel as therapy. And today's guest is Helen Suk from Toronto, Canada. Helen, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Well, I'm so excited that you decided that you wanted to get on and share your story because you are also a champion of the movement for women to travel solo. Yes?
Yes, I am.
Absolutely. Well, where did that champion for this movement come from?
It's been a process. Ever since I can remember, I had always dreamt of distant lands, of different cultures. One of my majors in university was actually anthropology, and I focused very much on cultural anthropology. I guess I found not just the cultural framework of the society that I live in, but my home life was restricting. I felt a little constrained. I knew that there was so much more out there than what I was experiencing here, and more it felt like a bubble, sometimes a prison. And that's really where it came from. And it wasn't until I was 23. I had just graduated from university. I had originally planned to be a journalist, and then I changed my mind, but I didn't have a plan B. So I was at a stage where, of some confusion, some uncertainty, and I didn't really know what to do next. I had also emerged from a very tumultuous home life. So within my family, we had struggled with both alcohol and substance abuse, domestic violence, depression, divorce, bankruptcy, the loss of our home. And when all these destructive forces are coming at you, you're really swimming against the current, and it's disillusioning. Right? So I was lost, to be blunt. But what I did know was that I needed a new environment, a change of scenery.
Yep.
Somewhere I can maybe start from scratch, a clean slate where I could redefine myself, discover who I really am.
And, I think we use that phrase, a change of scenery, as a very socially acceptable phrase to start to say, I needed to leave some of the mess behind. I needed fresh perspective. I needed to see what else the world has to offer because you were feeling so confined by the world that you were in.
Yes, I was. And there is this saying that travel is not going to solve your problems. If you're using it to escape, you'll find that it's going to do you no good. And it is true, because your problems will follow you wherever you go. Having said that, at the time, it was more like a tool, right? It wasn't the answer. It wasn't the silver bullet, but it was the tool that allowed me to really uncover the layers of myself that were hiding other aspects that I didn't know existed.
That's amazing.
Right? Yeah.
And I love, we're going to just keep it going back and forth because what you're saying already is really profound. And we're only 3 minutes into this conversation.
Yeah.
So I can't wait to see what else comes. But there truly is a big difference between going away and running away.
Yes.
And
Yes,
if you're
yes, there
trying to
is.
run away, yourself, your stuff, it's always going to find you. It's always there with you. And, people can run away literally and figuratively. And when you talk about what was going on with some of the things in your family with addiction or things like that, it's just another form of running away.
It is. It's instead of running away, I guess what I was doing was I was seeking something. I was running towards something.
Absolutely.
I wasn't sure what it was, but that calling was coming from such a deep place within me that in my mind there really was no other choice. It was just something I felt that I had to do. So what I did was I moved to the UK. My poor mother, I knew that she wouldn't respond very well to that. So I told her that I would be gone for the summer. But I knew deep down that I would be gone for much longer.
So you were just easing her in.
I was. So I didn't come home until 2 years later.
Okay.
And I was on a working holiday visa. London, England seemed like a good place because I spoke the language. The culture shock wouldn't be too intense. And I would be able to work because there would be no language barrier. So for 2 years, I worked as an admin assistant. And between temp jobs, I would leave London and travel around Western Europe. And it really worked out quite well. And those 2 years were pivotal, really. So while my friends had started their careers, I was, gallivanting around Western Europe and making friends in London. And because London is such an international city, very similar to Toronto in that way, um, I, I still felt somewhat at home, but in a new place.
Well, that makes complete sense. Again, you made some choices about where you were going that was going to create that change of scenery you desired, but you were doing it in a way that wasn't totally stretching your comfort zone.
Exactly.
That makes sense. I want to just also reflect back on what you had said earlier as well, that you were able to use travel to discover some things that you didn't even know about yourself. And I would almost wonder, not all of us have the same opportunities as children, but I find that often as children, we're given this free rein to explore and experiment. And then as time goes on, society and our family and roles and things like that rein us in a bit more. And so we're not given that free rein to explore and experiment. But sometimes I have found for myself in travel that I'm actually rediscovering some of these things that I may have truly had passion for when I was young, but for whatever reason actually buried that. Is that something you can relate to?
Yes, yes. So sometimes something within you will resurrect itself, right? Um, and I always liked animals. I became allergic to cats and dogs for many years, but not as much anymore. Um,
Interesting.
but to travel to places like the Galapagos Islands or Kenya or South Africa or Rwanda to trek gorillas, all of these experiences have really given me such a much deeper respect for the world's wildlife, right? So I mean that's one of the um, big learnings that I've had during my travels,
Mm-hmm.
because there is nothing like um, seeing these animals in the wild. Um, I mean, the idea of going to a zoo to me is it's just so disenchanting. Um, so it's all these things, and it's not until we actually expose ourselves to these different environments that we can actually come to realize how much they mean to us.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And in looking at your website, you truly can see, where some of your passions lie. So let's talk about one of the places. I hate asking the question of your favorite place. So I'm going to ask it this way, right? I'd like to hear a place that you consider a sanctuary for yourself. And maybe you've only been there once, maybe you've been there multiple times, but there's a place where you go where you're just feeling completely like at peace.
Wow. That's a tough one. On the west coast of Canada, I mean, we live in a very vast country. Um, in BC, there is a town called Tofino on Vancouver Island, and it it is such a magical place. Some of the most surreal, uh, moody beaches that feel like it's the end of the earth. And going there during the low season or shoulder seasons, um, it's it's just such a magical experience. And because there's so much natural beauty, ancient rainforests, also there is a healing quality to a place like that. And when I traveled there, I had gone um, just after my father had passed away. We were estranged for some time, so there was a lot of stuff um, to sort of deal with on in addition to his actual death. And it was exactly the place I needed to be
Wow.
at that time. And I would go there again and again. And it it had such a profound impact on me. It may not have had it been under different circumstances,
Absolutely.
um, but I truly believe in the healing power of places that nourish your soul that way. And I would, I've written so many blog posts about it that I think anyone would see by reading it, just reading them, just how much I adore that place.
Absolutely. I love it. And, it doesn't have to be special to anyone else. It just has to be something that resonates with you. I think that's the more important part is that our place can be wherever we make it. And oftentimes it has to do with partly of the beauty of the destination and partly with wherever we're at personally and what we're working through in that process. And if we're able to work through it successfully, then that place holds a special place in our hearts as well.
Yes, it's also about what we're willing to open ourselves up to, right?
Tell me
So,
more.
my threshold for danger is probably a little higher than most women.
Okay.
so, um, I don't have any problem with traveling to India or to Kenya or to Jordan or the West Bank solo. And I have visited all those places solo. Um, it's not that I don't have any fears about that place, um, but courage is being afraid of something, but still going.
Absolutely.
And it's if if I hadn't gone to those places, I wouldn't have seen what what I had seen. And in my experience, the perception of danger is almost always greater than the actual reality. Um, I, I discovered that particularly in the West Bank. We in the West have this. We're bombarded with this narrative of the sort of bloodthirsty Arab who's out to kill everyone. But I found something very different. And I like to tell people that if if you believe that a certain people are exactly that, then that's what you're going to see.
Right.
Like you have to be able to believe that there's good in everyone. There's something beautiful in every place, no matter how seemingly ugly um, it is. And this is
Yes.
maybe the photographer in me speaking as well, because I
Probably.
believe I believe that no matter where you go, you will always find beauty, but you have to know that it exists. Because
Absolutely.
if you think that it doesn't, then you're not going to find it.
Nope. You're right. So, what's been the hardest part of travel for you?
one particular trip comes to mind, and that was India. So I traveled there on my own. Um, I had stopped backpacking a long time ago. So I had a suitcase. And when you are at a train station, for example, who's going to watch your things when you need to use the little
Right.
girl's room?
Yes.
Right. And I was at a train station at night. I was sleep deprived. I had to fight off beggars and touts and a driver who had tried to rip me off. Um, and I was just utterly exhausted. And I arrived at the train station, and it was the one time during my travels that I actually felt quite afraid because I didn't see a single woman in sight. I didn't see any tourists. I didn't, it was just, no one had tried to physically touch me, but it was just this feeling. It was just
Yep.
this instinctual feeling that I had. And then I actually finally found a waiting room that was specifically for women. And so I went in there and I sat down, and no one else in there spoke English, but that was okay.
Sure.
I felt safe. But then I had to go to the bathroom. So I just sat there for a couple of minutes, just holding it in and trying to figure out what to do with my things because I couldn't bring them in with me. So finally, I had to go. So it was probably the fastest bathroom break I've ever taken.
Right.
And I just zoomed in and out. It was one of the worst bathrooms I've ever used. But I came out, and it was one of those squat toilets, right? And I've never been good with squat toilets, so I ended up like peeing on my jeans. So I left the bathroom with these urine-soaked jeans, but my luggage was still there.
Yes.
So I was pretty excited about that.
Yeah, like it's a small victory, but frustrating in the process for sure.
Yeah, and these things will come up, right? And sometimes it's just trial and error, right? I might run into situations like that, and then for the next trip, I'll be better prepared.
Of course.
Yeah, so it's and then with all the other sort of usual precautions that women have to take, walking alone at night somewhere, or I just go by my instincts, right? Um, and in all my years of travel, and I would say about 20 years, I have never been robbed. Um, Funnily enough, the times that I have been pickpocketed or had my purse stolen was when I was at home or in the U.S. It's kind of ironic, but that is the truth.
Well, and honestly, I think our nature is that while we're aware when we're at home or traveling close to home, our defenses might not be as high.
Exactly.
And so it works both ways that, your defenses are a little bit higher. So you're more aware, you're more tuned into that. So theoretically, nothing bad is going to happen. But when you're at home, we know the bad part of town, or we know, some of those bad choices, but I can't even tell you. And sometimes there's things I admit on this show that I don't recommend for other people. But I know there's been times where I've gotten comfortable in the airport, familiar enough airport, a lot of people who look like me, who talk like me. And if I needed to use the restroom, I'll just be like, can you just watch my bag for a minute? And then I'll watch someone else's bag for a minute and think nothing of it. And that's not necessarily a good choice, right? But but we're at home, and so it doesn't feel. And I certainly wouldn't do that traveling in a foreign airport. That would be a very bad choice. It just, I think, and again, I'm a small town girl, so I come from a pretty trusting place to begin with, and it actually takes work for me to be a little bit more, to put my city edge on, I guess.
I mean, it's a tough balance, right? To be cautious and vigilant without being paranoid
And without living in fear.
and without living in fear. Exactly. Because there have also been the times when I have sort of left it to the universe. And, I remember being on a bus in India, not knowing if it was taking me to the right place. I mean,
Right.
and not just within the city, but actually leaving the city. Um, and just, just hoping, oh God, I hope this is taking me to the right place. Um, and there's really no one else I can ask, um, because no one speaks English.
Right.
And it all works out. And then there are those times when I will just put my trust in the hands of a stranger, and ask, can you help me?
Right.
And it has always worked out. There's always been a positive outcome to that. But again, it's important not to be too trusting.
Right.
Um, you know, make wise decisions, and just go with your gut. If your gut is telling you something is off, then it's usually true.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So when you think about, and you've been doing this travel gig for quite some time, what are some of the biggest lessons that you've learned about yourself through your travels?
Oh gosh. I would say that even though, many of us see travel as a way to open ourselves up to the world, it's also about the power it has to change the lens through which we experience our own home, our own city, our own country. So, as much as I have had the most incredible experiences in foreign destinations, um, I, I look at home very differently. So, for example, Toronto is a very multicultural city. There are very few places in the world, um, that that have that. So, within 20 minutes of where I live, I can, if I have a craving for Cuban food or Ethiopian food or even Tibetan food, I can get it, right? Um,
Right.
and you can't really say that of a lot of other cities. So I really, truly value that. So whereas in other countries like South Korea, which is my other motherland, it's a very ethnically homogenous country, and although um, there are so many virtues, in South Korea, I could not live in a place that is so homogenous that way.
That makes
I've also
sense.
Yeah, and when I was 40, I it sounds very cliche, but I did do the quit my job, sell my home, put all my belongings, cram them into a 10 by 10 foot storage unit. And I spent about a year and a half traveling. It was not exactly nomadic, but semi-nomadic. So
Okay.
I was coming and going. Um, the longest I spent away from home was 3 months. So I spent 3 months in Thailand, and then I would come back home, and then I would
Okay.
plan the next adventure, and then I would leave, and I would be doing this from my parents' home. So I was essentially homeless. But it's just one of those things I just had to suck it up.
Understood.
But I did not know if I would come back. I did not know if I would love it so much that I would just stay.
And
And
so what did you learn?
I learned that lifestyle is not for me. It takes a certain uh, personality, um, to be comfortable with that, and I am not one of them. I need some stability. I need a home base. Um, there are very few people in the world who don't, but I have found that even nomadic travelers eventually do settle down, and have a home base, because it's tiring. It's tiring,
Absolutely.
and the transience of it is it it can become a little too much, because it means that your friendships are also transient. It's hard to maintain relationships. And eventually, for a lot of people, you just want some roots. Um, and that feeling, I experienced that feeling maybe sooner than most people. Um, for example, travel bloggers who have been on the road for like 7 years. Um, but but I would not have known that had I not made the decisions that I made. It was much harder. It was much easier to make those decisions when I was in my 20s after I graduated from university. Oh, hey, I'm gonna take off to London for 2 years. In your 40s, it's different, right? So almost all my friends are married with children. So I don't see them as often.
Mm-hmm.
I just tend to walk to the beat of my own drum. But and also making the decision to leave my job and to sell my home. It was excruciatingly painful. Selling my home, especially, it felt like I felt like I had lost a part of myself, and I was grieving, and I was inconsolable for a day. I did not expect that emotional reaction, but that's what happened. So I really felt like I was making certain sacrifices. Also, when you're in your 40s, you're much more aware of not just your parents' mortality, but your own mortality.
Sure.
Are you saving for retirement? All of these questions. And also, I'd made those decisions not that long after my father's death,
Mm-hmm.
and he had died in a long-term care facility alone. So at the back of my mind, I'm thinking, is that going to be me?
Sure.
Um,
That calls to question all of these very natural things for our lives. And so I lost my mom when I was 30. I lost my dad when I was 40. So
mhm.
so I've decided now I'm an orphan and I'm up for adoption if anybody's interested. You never know. But there is some perspective that comes, I think, with each decade. We have this whole new sense of growth, and we just have to decide what we're going to do with it. And so I think as we're building and accumulating and and sort of charting one particular path for our lives by building a career and then buying the home and things like that in our 20s and 30s, by the time you hit 40, you start to wonder, well, now what?
Mhm.
So if you were doing that in your 40s and then selling the home, and then there is some sort of comfort in being a homeowner. There's also a lot of challenges. There's some symbolic pieces that come with that. So while I think, I wonder, was it as much about the house as it was, all the things that it symbolized for you?
It was definitely what it represented, right? So for someone like me who had a very unstable childhood, I that instability um, was in a maybe in a sort of messed up kind of way comfortable because it was familiar.
Mm-hmm.
Yet stability was always something that I had longed for. So there's this, I've always felt this sort of ambivalence about being in one place for too long. I tend to get restless quite easily. I'm not sure if that's true now because I've had the experiences that I've had as a result of the decisions that I've made in life. But whereas before I made the decision to sell my home and quit my job, I would go to work every day and I would think, this sucks, right?
Right.
Because I know I could be doing this, and this, and I could be seeing this place and that place.
Well, stability can be confining. And I think the word that you used to describe, part of where you were at that point was like jail.
At times it did feel that way. It did feel that way.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So,
But I mean, now that I'm home, right,
mm-hmm.
I can wake up every day before I go to work and say, I'm okay with this. I am content with this because I have been on the other side and I know what that's like.
We reserve the right to make a new choice. But when we make a choice, there are very good reasons behind it, hopefully. And we get to go live with the results of that choice. And so you did that. And then you lived, you learned, you did, and then you were able to make a new choice when the time came and you were ready to, evaluate and do different.
Yeah, and there were risks certainly of making those choices, but to me the greater risk was in not trying, and you know ending up on the last days of my life and regretting not having tried it. I mean, we have to get out of our comfort zone sometimes, to really truly uh, realize what we're made of,
Absolutely.
how strong we are, and how resilient we can actually be. I mean, I always knew that I was a resilient person just because of my experiences growing up.
Hmm.
Um, but but travel can uncover strengths that other kinds of strengths that you never thought that you had.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I mean, that's just like other experiences in our life, like depending on how we choose to look at that, it's either going to make us stronger or it's not. And it's so much about perspective, but when you travel, you're able to put things into a different perspective. And that's part of what I love is when I am traveling and I can be in a place where I'm not bogged down with what needs to happen around the house, or not in a particular work routine, or not obligated by certain people or things like that. It gives me the time and space to process and put things into proper perspective. And I use travel as therapy to admire the beauty of the world, to look at how things are similar and different, and it gives me perspective on my place in the world, and to really spend some time thinking, am I where I want to be? Am I doing what I want to do? Is this what I need to be doing for, the next year or 3 or 5 or 10 or whatever? And if it's not, it gives me a chance to try something else and put that into perspective as well. So
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
that's the joy, right?
yeah. It's and one particular trip comes to mind, when you talk about how our perspectives can change through travel. And I'm going to go back to India. Um, I took that trip uh, about a year after the death of my brother. Now, my brother, he led a high risk lifestyle. He struggled with addiction, um, and he was killed in a homicide. So
Wow.
it was a violent death, and it it nearly destroyed me. Um, and when I went to India, I knew I wanted to take it alone. So that's what I did, and I went to Varanasi. So Varanasi is it's the holiest city in India. It's where people of the Hindu faith go to either die or to say farewell to their loved ones. It's where bodies are cremated, and then the ashes scattered into the Ganges River, which is the most sacred body of water in the country. It's believed to have the power to cleanse the soul of sin, to purify it. And when you release the ashes of your loved one in the river, it's believed that it would release the soul from the cycle of life, death, and rebirth.
Wow.
So, so Varanasi at the time for me was very symbolic. I was really
Sure.
struggling. I was feeling very alone. You know, how do you talk to someone about how you feel when someone you love has been murdered, right? Who has had that experience?
Right.
Um, so I was in a very lonely place. Very few things meant anything to me anymore. And when I went to Varanasi, before the trip, I'd actually considered taking some of the ashes of my brother. He had been cremated, and taking them with me to India to release some of those ashes into the Ganges River. Um, I also found out after that it's illegal to transport human remains on a plane. So I didn't want to run the risk of getting arrested. So
Sure.
I did not do that. But when I was there, I it was it was so transformational because for a whole year I had focused on his death,
Yep.
the end of his life.
Yep.
And it was just, I was having such a hard time with it. And I couldn't get those visions um, out of my mind. What were his last hours like?
Yep.
How much pain was he feeling, right? What were his last thoughts when this was happening? And what I learned in India was that death it's a natural part of the cycle of the soul, right? Life, death, rebirth, heaven. When one reaches heaven, it depends on karma. And but in the West, right? I mean, we're very sort of death phobic. We fear it. We don't want to talk about it. I actually
Yep.
lost a friend because he just did not know how to deal with what I was going through, and then ended up being quite, I think, um, neglectful. But we have this culture here that is so anti-death. We just don't want to touch the subject. We keep it sort of hidden. But in India, that's not how it is. It's very raw. It may be startling to some people
Yep.
who visit, but for me, it was such a powerful experience because for the first time, um, I sort of left a candle offering on the river with his photo in it. And that is meant to, for Hindus to do that, it could mean um, putting your loved one on a safe passage
Sure.
to heaven. So the act of doing that was very symbolic for me. Um, did it did it mean that he went to heaven? I don't know,
Right.
but it didn't really matter at the time, if because it meant something to me at that moment. Um, Doing it maybe selfishly made me feel better, um, but it it absolutely made me look at what happened to him in a different light,
Mm-hmm.
right? I didn't see it as such a horrible, violent um, event. I began to see it more as a beginning of where his soul will go next. So, it's experiences like this that
Yes.
you won't really get by going on a Kontiki tour, right?
True
Um,
statement.
it's only when you um, travel solo that you can have the depth, that kind of depth of experience. Sure, maybe
Absolutely.
actually, you could do it if you travel with a friend or family member or spouse. um, but when you're in it and you're alone, that there's a lot of soul searching that you can do, that you just wouldn't be able to do if you were traveling with someone.
Absolutely. I mean, really, we've talked in a past episode about how solo travel is the ultimate form of self-care, and to be able to nurture and do for you in a way that you probably haven't necessarily taken the time or space to do. It can make a real difference.
Yeah, and it absolutely did for me. Um, but we, as I mentioned before, we have to um, open ourselves up to that. So instead of drinking margaritas on a beach, um, you
Yep.
know, expose ourselves to new ideas, new values, new cultural norms. We like to think that everything that we do here is the best, and that is just not true.
No, absolutely. It makes a huge difference. Well, I can't believe how quickly this conversation has gone today. We are just about out of time, and I want to make sure that you get a chance to share a little bit about your business and where people can find you and connect with you. And I see you have something on your website that looks like it's an offer that anybody might be able to take advantage of. So I'd love for you to share that with my listeners.
Yeah, so I can be found at notwithoutmypassport.com. Um, And if you join my email list, you'll get a free ebook about mobile photography. That's something that I like to feature on my Instagram account. You can find all my social media channels on my blog. And even though I'm back at home and I'm working full time again, I'm still maintaining my blog. Maybe not as much, but I'm still working on it. I have a huge backlog of content that I have yet to share with my readers. I'm also planning a trip to Nova Scotia in Eastern Canada for a road trip in the summer. So I'm really looking forward to that. And I'm always interested too about how travel has changed people. So, I always welcome my readers to share their stories as well, either through the comments on my blog or by sending me.
Fantastic. Well, all of that information will be provided in the show notes so people can find you. And Helen, I really appreciate you taking the time to share your story with us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's been a real pleasure, and I look forward to hearing more from you in the future.
And I look forward to hearing more of your podcasts.
Wasn't it great to hear the stories that Helen shared with us today? Remember that when you're choosing travel as a lifestyle, it doesn't mean that you're making a lifelong commitment. Do something as long as it suits you, and when it no longer suits you, choose something else. Now, we've reached the end of today's episode, but the conversation doesn't have to end there. Remember, go to transformviatravel.com to join our email list. You can find us on Facebook at Transform Via Travel, or follow Go Solo Live on Twitter. Wasn't it great to hear the stories that Helen shared with us today? It's important to remember that when you choose travel as part of your lifestyle, do it as long as it serves you. And when it no longer serves you, you can choose to do something else. Well, we've reached the end of today's episode, but the conversation doesn't have to end there. You can find us at transformviatravel.com or on Facebook at Transform Via Travel. You can follow the podcast on Twitter at Go Solo Live. Don't forget to share this with friends and invite them to listen to Go Solo Live. And if you or someone you know are interested in being a guest on the show, reach out to me directly at Jennifer at transformviatravel.com. Until then, remember to go solo, not alone.